Hi there. Today we are going to talk about mining cryptocurrency and get into the nitty gritty of how it's done and different ways of doing it and how you might do it. Um, so before we begin, I want to start with uh, just the basics here. So what we're looking at is an infographic about how blockchain works. And what I want you to pay careful attention to are steps 3 and 4. So, what's going on here is in any decentralized network or any peer to peer service, you've got a group of people that are running the code for that service on their personal machines. And now the question is, what motivates those people to run that code and to take care of other people's requests? And that is the reason why mining was invented. It was invented to give people an incentive to actually run the network. And so, in the case of cryptocurrency, what's happening is someone downloads the software, they run it on their personal computer, and the network will use their computer to, in the case of Bitcoin, perform cryptographic hashing and actually process transactions and figure out which transactions are valid and add them to the blockchain. So in the case of Bitcoin, all those people that have downloaded the software and are mining and processing transactions, they are all in a race. Everybody's trying to be the first one to successfully decrypt the cryptographic puzzle and be the first one to take that puzzle and add it to the blockchain. And the whoever's first is the one that gets to add it to the blockchain, and as a result, they get rewarded, right? And so, not every blockchain rewards through adding currency to the blockchain. So we'll kind of get into the details, but just kind of wanted to give a basic overview of what's going on, how this peer-to-peer network works, and how mining is a pretty integral part of it. All right, so now let's talk a little bit about proof of work versus proof of stake. So they're both forms of mining, but they work really differently. So Bitcoin and most cryptocurrencies are proof of work currencies. And basically the harder you work, the more cryptographic hashes you solve, the more free coin you're going to get and the more lucrative it becomes. Proof of stake works a little bit differently. Proof of stake, the way most of those networks are set up is you put a little money in, so you put some sort of deposit in, and you download the software. Um, just every once in a while, randomly, the network is going to pick you. They're, just going to randomly choose a computer. And if your computer's on and running, your computer is going to do the cryptographic hash. It's going to validate whatever transaction is happening, and you will just automatically uh, get some free coin. And the reason for these are both valid but very different, right? And so in both cases, this is done because they're trying to foil what's called a 51% attack, right? And so in the case of proof of work, um, you're paying money to have your computer uh, crank through all those cryptographic hashes. And so if you actually had a computer that was big enough and fast enough to, to outpace 49% of the network and push through a false transaction, you would be spending so much on electricity that you would be losing money, right? So it makes a 51% attack very difficult because of the work. The work itself outweighs the reward of trying to commit fraud. Proof of stake is a little bit different, right? So proof of stake, because it's random, you just never know who's going to do it. And if they do find some sort of fraud or collusion, they've already got your money. They've got some sort of deposit. And so if you actually owned, let's say, 51% of a currency, actually literally like 51% of all the coins for a currency out there, that was proof of stake, and you programmed your computer network to try and do some sort of fraudulent activity, right, and like win a bunch of money, the network operators should, in theory, shut you down and confiscate all of your deposits. And so, if you have enough deposits in the system, to cover 51% of that system, again, it's an economic disincentive to try and commit this kind of fraud. It makes it very difficult to commit fraud and steal more than you're losing in the process. So, one of the issues with proof of work is that because there's this competition, there's this constant arms race. And what happens is that you get a few miners who become more and more successful, get bigger and bigger machines. And what ends up happening is that the percentage of the network, and remember this is, peer-to-peer, decentralized network, and the percentage of the network gradually becomes less and less spread out, right, and more concentrated. So you just have a few really powerful miners that are contributing huge amounts of processing power and getting the majority of the free coin as a result of essentially running the network. And what happens in that situation is that it kind of goes against the original intent of something like Bitcoin, right, which was designed to be a truly decentralized currency. It was designed to be run on the user's machine, and so everybody that used it would add their own little bit of processing power, and in total, all the users would power the network. But what's winding up happening is that you've just got a few super users that are essentially running the network, and that makes it vulnerable to things like fraud. It makes it vulnerable, to these super users essentially taking over, and changing the way a cryptocurrency works uh, in order to maximize their payouts, as opposed to, some larger goal that maybe the cryptocurrency started with. So a big part of why people are moving towards proof of stake is because there really is um, there's no real incentive to getting into a hardware arms race, right? The like whether or not your computer gets picked has less to do with your computer's performance and more to do with just random chance. And in some cases, it has to do with how much currency you own. So the more currency you own, the more likely you are to get picked. Um, so it's a very different way of solving the same problem. Um, and yeah, we'll kind of get into next exactly kind of what that looks like in real life. Now, before we get too much further, I do want to warn you that this is about to get really nerdy. So if you are not a technical person, if you are afraid of code, if you're afraid of getting into the guts of your machine, there are a few tidbits in here, but you're going to have to sit through some pretty nerdtastic talk. All right, so, and that begins right now with this chart. So what we're looking at is a chart of processing power being used on the Bitcoin network over time, right? And so each of these three sort of epochs represent three distinct kinds of processors that miners have used to mine Bitcoin. So you'll notice that first section there, that's the CPU era. So this was the birth of Bitcoin. Uh, the original founders had this idea that everyone was going to be running Bitcoin code base on their own personal computers. Um, and the playing field was relatively level. Uh, and as you can see on the left, we're looking at the hashes per second. Um, so that as that line increases, it gets up into the mega hashes and then finally the tera hashes. Um, and that line is not showing any signs of slowing down, right? So, and what that is that is competition playing itself out. Um, so what we're seeing is people just kept stringing together more and more advanced hardware in order to compete. So as CPU sort of fell out of favor, people started stringing together GPUs or graphic processors. Um, those graphic processors were usually scavenged from video game desktops, things like that, and then strung together, daisy chained together, uh, maybe 6 of them all running simultaneously, just cranking through these cryptographic hashes in an effort to be first, to add a block to the blockchain and get that reward. And what you then saw is sort of the miners graduated to these things called ASICs, right, which is a dedicated processor, and it's actually built just for the purpose of doing the kind of decryption that Bitcoin runs, which is SHA, right? And so that decryption is all these things do, and they are just lightning fast. So they're running many terahashes per second. So I mean, literally, they're running, for every one cryptographic hash that somebody's home computer is doing on their CPU, they're doing about 10 trillion. It's a huge disparity, and so it's no wonder when you think about somebody running one of these ASICs versus somebody running a home computer on a CPU. It's very difficult to compete. Um, and so I know you're watching a video about how to mine, and it might come as a surprise that I'm going to tell you not to mine Bitcoin unless you are ready to shell out some serious dough. Bitcoin is probably not where you want to go as a miner. That said, there is still money to be made mining. Uh, Mining is fascinating and an integral part of the network. The trick is just knowing where to focus your resources, right? And that's, again, going back to proof of stake, part of what makes proof of stake so interesting, because unlike proof of work, there is no arms race for faster and faster processors. So let's just keep going here with the proof of work. And so this is what an actual Antminer ASIC looks like. And you're thinking to yourself, okay, maybe I'll go get one of those. I can be competitive. They cost about $1,000. Maybe that's like a worthy outlay. But here's the issue. This is what your competitor has running, in their ASIC farm. They've got hundreds of these things. It is going to be nearly impossible to compete with something like this unless you have a pretty deep bankroll, right? So this is the point at which I'm going to give you an escape hatch. So what we're looking at now is a company called Coinomia, and it is a mining company that rents their server space, right? So this is for all you people out there who are not at all technical. You don't want to deal with this stuff. You just want to know, how can I put money in, get money back? And if you want to mine without any hassle, this is probably the way to do it. There are a bunch of companies like this. This just happens to be, the one that I'm using in this example. Should always do your own research. Make sure you understand, that the company is secure and not going to wander off with your money and shut down someday. Um, so, approach with caution. But let's just, have a look at what they offer here and sort of think through why this might make sense. So, first up, let's look at their pricing. Now, the thing about mining is that every every time you're running a terahash, or every time you're running any hash, you are using up electricity. And the way that these guys compete and make money is they set up solar powered and geothermal powered, uh, giant server farms, giant, Antminer farms, in countries and in places in those countries where power is very cheap. So as a result, uh, they can basically run a lot of computing power using relatively little electricity per hash, and and since they're collecting cold hard cash from the rest of us, it's a pretty good business to be in. If you happen to have a few million bucks, maybe you should just get right into this business yourself. But if you're like the rest of us, you're stuck with one of these three options. And let's just sort of go over, what these mean and whether or not this is actually a good idea. And so they've got, the sort of three options here of sort of pool, machine, and rack. And what's going on is, if you're mining Bitcoin, they're going to limit you to 3 terahashes per second. If you're mining Ethereum, zero point 0.5 megahashes per second. Now that goes up by a power of 10, uh, along with the price, right? Again, goes up by a power of 10, goes up slightly less than a power of 10, 57.7. Um, so each time you're doing this, you're paying 10 times as much and getting 10 times as much power. So what that means is that as you get closer to the theoretical limit, you're going to get a lot more chances to win, right? It's like it's not just an even linear curve. It's definitely more of a sort of steep power law kind of curve, right? So think of it as sprinters, right? Um, the guys who are fastest, they're always going to win. It's not equal. So it does make sense if you're going to do something like this to just shell out the 10 grand. However, that's something that makes sense on paper. But remember that you're trading fiat currency for future Bitcoin earnings. So what you're essentially doing is betting on the future of Bitcoin. If Bitcoin goes up, then that's a really good deal. If Bitcoin goes down, uh, you're out money, right? Because basically that $10,000 doesn't go nearly as far if Bitcoin drops down to, let's say, I don't know, 500 bucks per Bitcoin. Whereas if Bitcoin goes up, if Bitcoin is, up around 10 grand per Bitcoin, I mean, you're going to pay for this contract with one Bitcoin, you know? So as with anything, it's a bit of a gamble, and I think the kind of the spirit of mining is this whole idea that you're going to, contribute time and hardware and effort for, for these coin rewards, right? It's not about plunking down money, right? And so if you are just looking to plunk down money, you might be better off day trading or doing some other option where you might get a better return or certainly a more of a guaranteed return on your investment. So I'm not trying to dissuade anyone, but let's be honest about kind of what's possible, what your money can buy. So, a really interesting concept that's good to wrap your head around at this point is the idea of pool mining. What that means is that you are joining up with a bunch of other miners and you're all contributing your raw processing power to the same pool, right? So, you're sort of a network within the network. And then that pool, whenever any computer in that pool manages to sort of win the race to solve a cryptographic puzzle and contribute to the block, the whole pool is rewarded. And every pool is a little bit different. In some cases it's equal. In some cases, uh, whoever actually gets it, gets more. In some cases, it's basically just distributed based on the amount of computing power that you contribute. So the cool thing is, let's say you've got, I don't know, just like a dinky GPU setup, and you join one of these pools. It is entirely possible that you will never actually solve any of these, cryptographic puzzles with your machine, and yet you can still get, some payouts, and they'll be small, but you'll get some payouts as a result of being part of the pool, right? So kind of it's the equivalent of being the nerdiest, slowest kid on the winning team, right? Um, so this is going to definitely bump up your chances of actually getting some Bitcoin and actually, uh, you know, I think getting more Bitcoin than the payment in electricity that's going out um, if you join one of these pools. So that said, though, I think I'm going to skip Bitcoin pools just because, again, it's the competition is so fierce. And if you want to get into them, go for it. I mean, they're all out there. You can see in this chart. Ant pool is huge. That'd be a good one to get into. F2 pool. Those are all big. I mean, you can join the winners, jump in there and see if you can make some money. Um, but what I suggest and where I'm going to steer this conversation is more towards mining other currencies besides Bitcoin. If you want to mine Bitcoin, the basics are the same. The steps that I'm about to show you will be relatively replicatable with other currencies. They all pretty much work the same. It really just comes down to really just doing your calculation of sort of what is your output, what does it cost you in terms of hardware and electricity, and what is your input, what are you actually making. So assuming you're still with us, you haven't run away screaming yet, at this point you're thinking to yourself, all right, when are we going to actually learn how to mine some cryptocurrency? And that point is basically now. So like I said, I'm gonna skip Bitcoin mining and jump straight into Ethereum mining. So Ethereum, for now, is still a proof of work crypto. They've talked about moving to proof of stake, but for now it's still proof of work. And so what we're going to do is we're going to look at what's called a mining pool. And so I mean we've more or less established that pools are the way to go rather than sort of doing a solo mining operation with your tiny computer at home. Um, so I don't know if ethereumpool.co is like the best pool to join. I do not have a hard opinion on that. But for the sake of demonstration, I just find these guys very easy, very transparent. Um, there's not a whole lot of marketing BS with this one. It just is what it is. It does what it says it's going to do, and it's pretty simple to set up and use. So we're going to start here. Again, not going to guarantee that this is going to be the pool that you should use, or that is going to have the greatest payout. That's something that I'm gonna teach you how to figure out. um, and you can kind of take it from here. So first off, I just want to explain. So you're seeing my full screen, and so I'm running Linux setup right now. And the reason that I chose Linux as opposed to Windows or Mac is because if you are going to take mining seriously, you really need a dedicated machine. And whether that's just sort of a salvaged motherboard strapped to some GPUs, or an um, old gaming machine that is just sort of sitting and collecting dust in your basement. Um, Mining is not the sort of thing, if you're doing proof of work, that makes sense to just run off your daily user laptop. Um, it's too labor intensive. It's going to slow your machine down, and frankly, it's going to hurt your chances of mining. So you're much better off going out and actually setting up a dedicated rig that's either running Linux or some lightweight flavor of Linux, and in some of these pool miner softwares, or there are actually some dedicated operating systems where all they do is mine. And that is definitely like the 500 level class. I mean, that's the sort of thing where if you do set up a server farm, um, or an ASIC farm, and have 50 of those things going, at that point, it makes a whole lot of sense to go out and get that sort of dedicated OS that just does the one thing, right? It's just super stripped down, super fast, doesn't really do anything else. But for now, I think Linux is gonna serve our needs. So let's get into it. So EthereumPool.co, um, all I have to do is go over to how to mine, and they're going to have just some pretty basic instructions here for Windows and Linux. And so what we are going to do is actually install this thing, right? There we go. All right. So we've got our terminal window up here. If you've never used terminal, don't be scared. It's not that scary. But basically, we're just going to follow these Linux commands, and we'll probably make some mistakes, but that's okay. You can just sort of follow along here. So sudo, if you're not familiar with it, is a way to uh, basically tell log in as like an admin or a super user, which gives you root access. Okay, so now I'm logged in, got my sudo stuff, so let's keep going here. And normally, I think I'd just copy and paste this. Because you do need to get everything right. Okay, so you'll see that. So this is basically telling me that this request to add a repository, right, which is sort of a folder file, essentially, sort of a backup spot, is now added, right? So this had resulted in some error. It might go back, but according to that, everything's okay. And just to speed this up a little bit, make sure that's exact. It is. Okay, again, everything is good. So this is good. We see it going through. So this means it's actually communicating with the server and pulling in all the files it needs. Okay. So it did fail on a couple things, but it doesn't look like those are fatal. Okay. So if you've been coding for a while, you know that um, that coding is 90% debugging. So if for some reason this doesn't work, we'll return and look at this. So there's no public key available. I'm not sure if that's going to be a problem. We'll find out in a moment. Okay. So if you're new to coding, this might seem a little scary, right? And it's entirely possible that, um, if you're not comfortable with this sort of thing, you might want to go with Windows operating system and do something that's a little bit more, I'll put it, user friendly. Basically, with these, you're just going to download the zip files, open them. You will have to edit a file, so you'll have to put your Ethereum address. So with this, we're going to do this a little bit differently. So once all this stuff finishes installing, and don't worry, I'm not going to make you wait the whole 4 minutes. What we're going to do is we're going to actually connect the program up to my Ethereum wallet address. We'll give it a name, and we'll also give it a hash rate. And the way that I'll figure out what my hash rate is by running this little test. So, see you in a few minutes. Okay, so I just took a little break and let that whole process run. And everything ran successfully. So before I join the pool, I need to figure out what my mhash value should be, right? So I need to actually see how fast this machine is. So in order to do that, I'm going to run this little bit of code. And what this does is, so I just installed, ETHMiner, and the G stands for GPU, the M stands for mhash, and I can already tell you that because I did not set up this computer with a bunch of GPUs, it's probably not going to work. So let's just try that. Sure enough, no GPU device with sufficient memory found, can't GPU mine. All right, so it's telling me to remove the G argument. So let's see what the CPU on this little guy can do. So I'm going to remove the GPU argument, and let's see what happens. So similar to running like a speed test, on your network connection, what this is basically doing is just running a sort of mhash value test where it's just basically pinging the processor. And according to this, they think that I'm going to get 0 hashes per second, which frankly doesn't surprise me, given what I'm working with here. This is not a real working computer. This is just kind of a virtual machine. So hopefully when you do it, you're going to get a real nice hash per second number here. And that's what you're going to fill in when you join the pool, right? And so So here's our bit about connecting to the pool. So how we're going to do that. So we're going to take this little template here and we'll paste that in. Right, so we're contacting the program that we just installed. I don't know if it's going to work with this G. I might have to take that out. So the hash rate in mega hashes, I am going to set that at, so notice this one. So if you want to try CPU, yeah, so we have to put a something here. So let's put 0. Oops. Yeah, it's not going to let me do that. So I'm going to back up here. Okay. So miner equals 0.01. What else? I'll have to grab my Ethereum address. So if you don't have an Ethereum wallet, you'll need to set one up, which you can do for free at myetherwallet.com. All right, so there's my address, so where it's going to dump my money, or at least it would. Let's see. And let's give it a rig name. So we'll call it failrig. Cool. All right, so in theory, this should be everything I need. I'm guessing this G is not going to work since I don't have a GPU, so I'm going to copy that. I'm probably going to have to resubmit it. Yeah, sure enough. Okay. Can't GPU mine, so let's get rid of that. Okay. So in theory, this should be setting me up as a miner in the Ethereum pool. So while that's working, let's kind of go back over here. And so what they say is so if you want to make sure that this thing worked, you're actually going to need to look at their list of miners and find out if you showed up, right? So in theory, let's see, miner stats. So I think, so if I were to put my Ethereum address in here, it should give me statistics on, how much mining I've done, along with just sort of confirming that I am in fact, one of the miners in here. And so while that's working over there, I want to just show you a few things, right? So clearly, if I were to paste my address in here, it wouldn't get me anything. But one of the things that's pretty cool about the blockchain, right, is that everything is open. And so one of the things we're seeing here is they've got all of their addresses, right, for everybody just sitting out here. And they show you, based on the hash rate that, this person is employing, how much ether they're actually earning per day. So this top earner, I mean, that's a whole lot of mega hashes. So this is a very fast machine that this guy's running. So let's actually, I'm just curious. So I'm gonna, well, so I'm gonna copy this text and go over here to Etherscan. And if you're not familiar with Etherscan, so this is a way to explore the Ether or Ethereum blockchain. So what we can do is we can put this guy's um, Ethereum address in there, and we can actually see on the blockchain what's going on. So, all right, so this person has 5,741 bucks worth of Ethereum in their account. So hopefully they're smart and take it out on a regular basis. And what you can see, so this eth.pp.ua, that's pretty clearly where this mining pool, that's their delivery address. It looks like this guy's also in another one, Nanopool, right? So this person is clearly, participating in multiple pools and getting Ether on a pretty regular basis, right? So you can see the last one was 15 hours ago, and before that was 1 day ago, 4 days, 7 days, 8 days, 9 days, 10 days. I mean, so they're cranking through and getting paid every day, and every time they get paid, you can see it sort of varies here. So a good day is about half an Ether, which at today's exchange rate is about 150 bucks. Normal day, zero point 0.2 Ether. So I think that's, what is that, about $50? So it's not a huge amount of money, but considering that this thing is just running in the background, it's fairly easy money. It makes sense. So let's look at, so this is the best performer, right? So let's look at somebody who is further down. So this person's only running 105. Oops. This person's only running 105 terahashes. It's surprisingly hard to highlight, you guys. I want to do a different one. All right. So there we go. So this person's running, okay, 106. And their estimate is 0.01 Ether per day. So let's actually cruise over here and see if that's true. Okay, so this is new. So they only got one payment, but it is from, this pool. And there you go. Yeah, 0.1. So that must be a pretty new miner or somebody that basically got on the network and then hopped off again. And so what you can see is, so that 0.1 is worth about 31 bucks. They only had one transaction. So somebody was experimenting with this, and I'm not sure if they either turned off their computer or just gave up. But this is sort of the other end of the spectrum here. And then you got some group stats of sort of blocks that were processed, and so you can get a sense of kind of, it's a very transparent mining pool. You can see what's going on. And like I said, it's probably not going to be the best mining pool. I'm sure there are other mining pools out there that are better. But it is just very easy to see what's going on with this thing, which is pretty cool. So once again, this thing's taken forever. I'm not too worried about it. So let's come back when that's done. And once again, I'll be back. Okay, good news. Everything has downloaded and we are starting to mine. So as you can see in the background there, it's just chugging away. So now that you've seen the guts and the inner workings of how, some mining software actually works, it's not super glamorous. I mean, it basically is just a program, running constantly in the background on your machine. And all it's doing is just helping other people with transactions and rewarding you for lending your hardware to the network. But I mean, you'll notice that there are kind of some dark alleys in cryptocurrency, and it's not always obvious who to trust, which pools are legit. It gets a little tricky. So I want to switch gears and go back to talking about proof of stake. and look at some of the proof of stake currencies that are coming up. And they tend to be a lot smaller than the proof of work currencies right now, um, largely because they're just they're a little bit more stable. There's not the whole sort of bubble mentality with a lot of these um, proof of stake currencies. And I think it's very telling that currency like Ethereum is talking about moving to proof of stake and away from proof of work. Um, so this might not be the currency of today, but there's a pretty good chance that some of these proof of stake currencies will be the crypto of tomorrow or next month or next year. So definitely something to beware of, and might be an interesting sort of buy and hold uh, a place to go now, given that if you can buy in cheap, those shares will be sort of get you in the door cheap, I guess is a good way to put it. Um, so the two that I want to look at, one is a pretty large cap, pretty innovative. It's this BitShares. Um, so BitShares offers their own blockchain, their own software, their own exchange. All of this is maintained by one company. There's no need really to go to some pool or third party or try and game this system, because the whole point of this system is that it's more or less impossible to game. You simply participate just like everyone else, and if you play by the rules and do well, then you earn money. And there's no real incentive to try and get around the rules that they've set forth. Um, Another one that's kind of cool that look at is called clams. Clams have been going up pretty consistently in value. This one's a little bit more. I don't know if it's called a hipster or millennial or what, but these guys are a bit more about sort of branding and just sort of talking about who they are. Um, but both of them more or less work the same way. Um, which is you're going to download the code base. So this is back to BitShares. Um, Download the code base, you register and buy some cryptocurrency. That cryptocurrency serves as your share. And so you do need to have sort of an upfront stake. You do need to actually buy things. Um, Same deal with, so now I'm back over to clams. So very clever. No chowder for you / clams at GitHub is where you can get the code. There's a link to that on the clams home site or homepage. And all this stuff, it works very similarly to the code that we just installed, for the Ether proof of work mining, but it's far less taxing on your computer. Um, it's a much more sort of mellow way to make some money and participate in an economy in a way that is kind of less competitive, more about actually participating in the community and using the currency as currency, as opposed to some sort of speculative gamble. Um, so I'm a big fan of proof of stake, and I do think that that's something worth investigating. So have a look at a few of these, try them out. And again, if you do, if let's say you've already gone ahead, you bought your GPU mining farm, um, it's always a good idea to go on, some of the websites that actually show you, what's gaining in value, what's kind of coming up, and maybe think about mining some of the smaller currencies where, um, maybe you can kind of get in while there's less competition and bank on those currencies coming up and being worth more in the future. Because again, remember, whenever you're doing proof of work, you're always gambling that the currency that you're mining will go up in future. Think of it just like mining gold or mining silver. I mean, if somebody came around and offered you the chance to spend a bunch of money to mine tin, would you? I mean, are you going to think about that? You've really got to make sure that whatever you're mining is valuable. So, um, if you haven't yet, have a look at some of the trading docs and have a look at some of the ICO literature and really sort of figure out, how to spot some winners in the crypto marketplace and how to spot some of the newer technologies coming up. Because pretty much everything in the crypto world is open to mining. I mean, don't limit yourself to just Bitcoin, just Ether. Really, keep an open mind. So you've seen a lot of the sort of background. You've seen a lot of the sort of nitty gritty of actually running code and loading these software programs. But the place that I want to end with is looking at the actual calculators. They're going to help you figure out, how much money you're actually going to make by mining these different currencies. And so I'm a big fan of this Crypto Compare mining calculator, just kind of right there. And once you get in here, so I just want to look at a few of these different currencies. So right now we're looking at Monero, and this is really interesting to me that it's a really low hash rate. It's only 500 hashes per second. It's only consuming 200 watts. Um, and they're saying that'll get you about $10 a month, right? So not a lot of power being sucked out there. Whereas you go over to Bitcoin, and now we're talking 4,730 gigahashes, huge amount of power, 1,293 watts, and it's just not that much. It's um, I mean, in terms of the profit you're generating, it's not very much considering how much more power you're using, how much more hardware you actually have to have. So I mean, if you go out and buy, yourself some $1,000 machine, and your profit is only 183, that's a poor investment. I mean, you really need to be getting very cheap electricity and having huge server farms to actually make money with Bitcoin mining. So it's definitely worth your while to spend some time actually running the numbers. And I know it's boring, not sexy at all, to go through. But I think that this is definitely one of the best places to really get an understanding of, what your mining dollar is going to get you. So spend some time in here, do the math, actually compare it, and only then go out and start looking at hardware. Um, and again, also, keep in mind that all of these different currencies do change in value quite a bit. So find one that you think is going to be up in 6 months, or a year. Um, if it had some meteoric rise in the last few months, that might not be the best currency to invest money in hardware to mine, right? So factor that in. But yeah, I mean, it's all out there. It is literally free money if you can figure it out. So there's certainly a reward for being clever. So get out there and go figure it out. Good luck to you.